Okay, so I have a couple other videos lined up, but they're taking longer than expected for me to do all the research for them. Although I do already have the winners of each of them already pretty much confirmed just off what I already know. So I decided I'll go ahead and put a random matchup in between, those being two Ice Titans. Mistoceros from the Xenoverse Kaiju War series, from CKW, versus Shimo from the Monsterverse. I'll divide it into multiple parts, talking about stuff like size, weapons, abilities, their actual power scaling, etc. So for size, Shimo at her tallest height is around 525 feet. However, she's more consistently in the 500 range and a more normal posture. She weighs around 155,000 tons, which is pretty impressive for a Monsterverse kaiju, as most of them don't really get that high in the weight category. Mistoceros' cannon height is around 450 feet and he weighs 115,000 tons. So Shimo is a decent bit larger than him. However, he is still bigger than something like Evolved Godzilla or current Kong. Meaning that if he was in the Monsterverse, he would be among the he'd be in the highest category of size for the current kaiju in the verse. As for their overall just build and how that would actually affect the fight, Shimo is far more built for melee combat than Mistoceros is. Shimo's arms are way bigger. Shimo's tail is armed with spikes, which Mistoceros does not have. And Shimo has a far larger head with far bigger jaws. Mistoceros is built more for grappling in fights, meaning grabbing opponents and kind of just tossing them around. And though he could definitely lift and even move, throw Shimo around if he wanted to, Shimo could do the exact same thing to him. He is a more skilled fighter by far. Shimo relies a lot on Scar King's direction, and when out of Scar King's control, she didn't really seem all that skilled overall. And even in the lore stuff we know, it seems like she relies more on her higher level of power than her actual combat skill. Whereas Mistoceros is pretty good at fighting opponents even stronger than himself, such as when he went toe-to-toe with Xenorax and Nucleonics, both of which would smoke him if it was off just power. It's important to note that both of these characters have fought similar characters to the other one before, with Shimo having fought Godzilla twice. Godzilla's build isn't too dissimilar from Mistoceros. They're both bipedal. They both use a very similar fighting style, grabbing their enemies and beating the shit out of them or firing beams from their mouths. And they're overall pretty similar in just even size and weight as well, and experience, although Godzilla is significantly older than Mistoceros. Mistoceros' age only being 1 million years, whereas Godzilla's is significantly higher. And Mistoceros has fought Dark-U. Dark-U is essentially if you took Shimo, made her way bigger, made her a dude, basically reversed her colors and gave her sun powers instead of ice. Dark-U is also significantly more powerful than Shimo. That's pretty blatant, as the fact that he's a living hypernova. The dude has enough power to destroy the solar system several times over. That's all of his power combined. His most powerful normal attacks would only reach the solar system ranges, but that's still pretty goddamn impressive. This isn't the first fight I've had between the Monsterverse and the CKW series. It is the first one I'm actually talking about, though, as all the other ones were animations. And I do think the animations are pretty consistent with how I see it, at least. With the animations where the CKW kaiju win, they should realistically win those fights. The ones where they lose, as of right now being one, that would being Makilbajorn versus Methuselah. Yeah, Makilbajorn's kind of a bitch. He's kind of weak for a CKW kaiju. Though Methuselah is by no means a top tier in Monsterverse, he's stronger than someone like Behemoth by a decent bit, and is arguably comparable to someone like Rodan. So yeah, he would smoke the hell out of the bear. That's just how that would go. As for abilities, Shimo's are pretty blatantly shown in the film. She can create storms with her absolute zero breath, she can shoot an absolute zero breath, and she can freeze stuff around her to absolute zero through essentially just releasing freezing energy. Her best feats in lore is stuff like ragdolling a pre-evolved Godzilla back in the day, not taking any damage from pre-evolved atomic breath, meaning she most likely upscales base Ghidorah at like a fucking super bare minimum, because people seem to argue that even base Ghidorah can somehow beat her now, which is just blatantly biased as hell. And she also caused an ice age with a single attack, so that's all pretty impressive. Mistoceros has a significantly larger arsenal with his standard absolute zero breath. It's not the same type of breath as Shimo's, as his breath is technically a Cairo laser, like think what they use against Destroya in the old Godzilla movies, whereas Shimo's is never really explained what the hell it is. It's just kind of a cold beam. Although you can argue it should be around light speed, or at least relativistic plus, as it should realistically be as fast as Godzilla's breath, which is made out of Chernivtsi radiation, which is around light speed. He can also generate storms, only unlike Shimo, he doesn't use his breath to do it, he just kind of controls the weather to a degree. Once he controls a storm, it kind of unlocks the rest of his arsenal, so he can absorb the lightning to boost himself, and then once he's absorbed the lightning, he can do stuff like a sonic scream, which isn't necessarily a fatal attack, but it could definitely stun other kaiju like pretty severely. It's loud enough to shatter glass and make buildings fall pretty casually. He also possesses plasma orbs, which he can only fire after he's absorbed lightning, as he's literally channeling the lightning into the orb in order to create it. The orbs are powerful. They're powerful enough to be somewhat relative to Carillion's plasma orbs, which are strong enough to harm Nucleonics, who at that point was already like... He was at least in the large star levels, as he was already pretty casually star level in the first episode. In episode 2, he's like literally grown up like over a decade. After he's absorbed enough lightning, he can also unleash an EMP pulse. Well, this likely wouldn't do much to Shimo, as there's no indication that she would get nerfed like Godzilla does by them. It's still an ability he does possess. He can also create fog, only that doesn't really do much here, as he rarely uses it in the series. He actually has not in animation form, only in lore. And that ability relies on you fighting a kaiju who's not good at pinpointing where you are, where Shimo doesn't really need to do that. She could just freeze everything around her, and she's gonna find where you are. Meaning camouflage techniques and like using stealth isn't gonna matter here, because it just wouldn't work on Shimo. He can also kind of super jump, like he can jump way farther than he realistically should be able to do, and he could semi-glide with his wings, which aren't really wings, they're just kind of like glider things. However, he's not going to be able to do much in the air, other than fire or get a couple beams off maybe, as Shimo can just blast him out of the sky. Plus, she can jump pretty far too for her size. As for their actual power scaling, I'm going to be generous to the Monsterverse and allow the Legacy of Monsterverse statements into Shimo's scaling for this, just to make it fair. But right off the bat, a base Godzilla with those statements would scale to the Hollow Earth. Hollow Earth emits gamma stuff, which that's just from one portal. That would make it around black hole level at least. You could argue it's all the way up to like supermassive black hole, however I personally think it's a little overhyping it. But the highest possible, and you can get it at, is like high solar system. You can argue it up the galaxy, but I think that's just a little much, as nothing in the Monsterverse indicates that level, and solar system seems more consistent with what we do see for me personally. Ghidorah would scale this as well. An amped Ghidorah would scale under Shimo. I know a lot of people like to pull this novel statement where they claim that Ghidorah got 100 times more powerful. I mean, there's also a similar statement for Mechagodzilla's breath, and yet Godzilla shrugged both of those off, and he still was hit with Shimo stuff and frozen briefly, and he was sort of struggling with her. So even if you did take that statement at face value, that doesn't prove anything, as Godzilla didn't die in base from that attack. Therefore, it would scale to his base, which Shimo is very obviously above regardless. So, okay, and that statement's kind of just overhyped weird shit to me personally. Like, there's no indication Ghidorah got that much stronger. The highest official multipliers I can find, other than wild statements, are the supercharged evolved multiplier for Godzilla, which would be around 20 times off his original base, meaning that if you count the solar system scaling, which is very iffy, I don't usually do this for scaling, this would get this Godzilla up to potentially high solar, maybe low galaxy. This is a super highballed Monsterverse, by the way. Under normal scaling, this is more consistently Dwarf Star to very low Solar. Now, Shimo's directly stated to be comparable to Supercharged Evolve. Like, so comparable, the fight would have been a toss-up. So, that's where Shimo would scale by proxy. Now, where does Mistoceros scale? Well, he also has a lot of stuff to go off of. Obviously, upscales pretty much everyone in the first episode. Would include Angeria. Angeria is a kaiju so powerful she can casually cause earthquakes and move tectonic plates with her attacks. So upscale Tyrantus. Tyrantus holds about the same power output as a Dwarf Star, according to, well, every scientist in the series. So he's pretty strong. But also upscaled Nucleonics, the younger version of Nucleonics, whose power output was around twice as powerful as the original Orbital Grenade. The Orbital Grenade was an attack that, if it would have hit with full power, could have atomized Japan, like completely reducing the atoms to quark matter all the way down through the Earth's crust. That's a pretty big feat. Think of Godzilla's Hollow Earth Breath feat, but like significantly bigger on a way grander scale. So right off the bat, he's upscaling all of that pretty significantly, as he's able to fight an adult Nucleonics who's way more powerful than her counterpart. Also upscales the beam that will basically one-shot Tyrantus, the same Tyrantus that is around Dwarf Star level at his highest level. This is before he got Anti-Nucleonics' own radiation, which would have boosted him to around Star level, and even that barely did anything to stop the beam from just going straight through him like it was nothing. So, right there, Mistoceros is stronger than a more consistent Monster scale that doesn't use the Legacy of Monster stuff. But as I said, I'm being generous to the Monsterverse with this one. So episode 2, Mistoceros' introduction, we obviously see him fight Nucleonics head on at the start of it. He's even briefly physically overpowering Nucleonics. This is important because Nucleonics is physically stronger than Tyrantus and Angeria at this point. The same Tyrantus and Angeria who could move and basically push tectonic plates, like physically push them. Their fight in New York was so just intense, it was shaking like entire sets of tectonic plates, like multiple tectonic plates at once. It even threatened to shatter them. It's like beyond Muto Prime levels of physical strength. Obviously Shimo is also well beyond Muto Prime. As GXK is just significantly above that point in the Monsterverse in terms of power. It's also pretty blatantly stronger than Krillon. Krillon's a kaiju that can control and almost even rival Dark U at points. Not necessarily in raw power, at least when it comes to like physical strength or beam strength, but in terms of his psychic abilities, he's around Dark U's level. Mistoceros upscales the Steel Dragon, who was able to survive getting hit with this, including one point where Krillon set him into space and then thrown back down. So obviously Mistoceros' durability is pretty freaking insane if he can take hits from solar system busters like Dark U and Krillon. By far his most impressive feat as of his introduction was that he himself briefly stalemated Dark U's own beam. Dark U's beam is comparable in strength to a hypernova. In fact, it's actually stronger. As his beam gets more powerful, the more he charges it. So a casual one is more like a hypernova. His full power one is looking a lot stronger than that, meaning most likely around the multi-solar category. And Mistoceros can briefly stalemate that with his own beam, which is obviously really impressive. Obviously, if the beam clash would have went on, he would have lost. After all, he's not only a much younger and weaker kaiju in Dark U, but he's just not as good in the stamina department either. Dark U's literally a living star, whereas Mistoceros is just a kind of freak of nature, a titan almost. But his best scaling by far is that he's still semi-consistently around Nucleonics' base. Nucleonics was able to take hits from Xenorax. Xenorax is a kaiju who just by waking up was able to basically casually blow up a large galaxy. Just by waking up. I want to reiterate that. At his full power, he wouldn't necessarily threaten the whole universe or anything, but he'd certainly threaten multiple galaxies at once, and he can definitely destroy multiple at once if he was to go all out. He's one of the few kaiju in the series who has the same destructive capacity as his actual AP, which is kind of insane. And Mistoceros did take a few hits from him. He even survived his own beam and Steel Dragon's being sent largely at him. As if that wasn't impressive enough, he also would semi-scale to Nucleonics' own regeneration, as they share a similar regenerative ability. Nucleonics can regenerate from getting wounds straight through his chest, like when Xenorax impaled him with his tail. Every cell in his skin was able to regenerate from the absolute zero breath Mistoceros himself fired, and although it hasn't came out yet, the CKW X Ghost of Hiroshima crossover will have Nucleonics' regeneration being roughly equivalent to that of Hiroshimasaurus, a kaiju who can basically regenerate from almost nothing. Now, that's not to say Nucleonics is going to regenerate from getting a part of him cut off and there'd just be two. No. But if he was, like, severely injured, so long as his brain's intact, like, mostly, he's coming back to life. And Mistoceros, well, not necessarily as good at regenerative abilities, he can still come back from getting half his body blown off. He would regenerate eventually. Now for speed, both of these characters have obviously faster than light reaction time, as even Kong has that. Shimo's faster than Kong. I know a lot of people might disagree with that, but she basically speed blitzes him at one point in the fight, which is kind of funny. So that kind of proves it. Mistoceros himself would upscale young Nucleonics, dodging tachyon beams, which are faster than light. The tachyon beams that I'm talking about are the quote-unquote laser eyes that Tyrantus has. They're actually tachyons, which are faster than lasers, and also slightly stronger, and they cut way better. But moving on from that, he can also react to Xenorax, whose movement speed on Earth is identical to his movement speed in space, which is massively faster than light. So when it comes to reaction speeds, Mistoceros is just significantly more impressive, like potentially millions of times faster. Actually 100% millions of times faster, as Xenorax traveled from a galaxy that was like 10 galaxies away to Earth in the course of like 2 hours. And he wasn't even going at his full speed, like he was in his fight on Earth against Nucleonics. So when it comes to just speed and reaction speeds, Mistoceros is just blatantly way better than Shimo there. So with all that out of the way, who do I think is going to win? And I think the answer is kind of obvious. I think Mistoceros most likely pulls off a win here. Although I do think it is close depending on how you scale the two. If you give Shimo the Legacy Monster statements like I did, Shimo could definitely hurt him. But he could also hurt her the same way. Both are kind of resistant to their own attacks, so I doubt either's absolute zero beams are going to do anything to each other. At least nothing too impressive, even though Mistoceros can get more off and most likely has a higher AP and destructive capacity. This fight's largely going to be a physical one, and although Shimo is significantly larger and their strength is somewhat comparable, Mistoceros is just blatantly so much faster. He's going to be able to get like 10 punches in her face before she can even get one swipe in, which is just a huge advantage. There's also the fact that he could fatally injure her by like ripping her throat out and she's dead, but if she bites an arm or a leg or a tail off, Mistoceros would just regenerate. Now, if she was to rip his face off, like crush his skull, then yeah, he's dead, but she's most likely not going to get that off before he kills her first. Also, just the blatant fact that Mistoceros has better ranged abilities. Although their main attacks are virtually identical, Mistoceros also has Plasma Blast, he can control lightning, he has tons of stuff that he could do to weaken Shimo from a distance, where Shimo would have to rely on an attack he obviously already has a resistance to, just like she does. Agility would also play a major part here, as he's just way faster and way more he just has way better maneuverability. He can jump several hundred feet in the air. Shimo can jump like maybe a few hundred, but like on a good day, more casually around 50. He's like jumping over skylines casually. So yeah, he's kind of like a Velociraptor, kaiju-sized Velociraptor when it comes to jumping, whereas she's more like a lion. Shimo's biggest advantage here, other than her size, is really her bite force, as when it comes to like biting, she's obviously the better one, because Mistoceros has a little beak that he would have to peck her with, whereas she can like bite into him like a great white shark almost, due to how her head's just built. Unless he somehow fails to react and she bull rushes him to like the side of a mountain and just starts beating the shit out of him, I don't see her really winning this. Now, do I see Mistoceros actually killing Shimo just in a random encounter? Probably not. I doubt he'd just kill another kaiju for no reason. But he definitely beat her. He would definitely beat her in a fight, and most likely at least injure her. I also don't see Shimo staying fighting for very long. Once she realizes this guy's like stronger than her and faster than her, she'd probably honestly give up. Shimo doesn't really seem to be the same as Godzilla when it comes to fights. Like, Godzilla would probably die before he'd ever been the need to anything. Shimo just kind of wants to go home, most likely, most of the time. So that's how I see this fight going. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking or subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.